Okay, any questions? Okay. John, I'm forwarding a complaint of not having received the link. Yes. Yes.
Well, I first have a question about the pranayama, because I was wondering why do we do these special breathing exercises as opposed to just normal breathing? I mean, like, what's the purpose of the...
When you play the piano, when you learn how to play the piano, and if you have a difficult passage you want to clean up, you play it slowly.
So it's slowing down the... I mean, what I noticed when we do the Kapalabhati or the alternating nostrils is that it emphasizes the sensations associated with breathing, so that I can... There's more of a contrast between...
Perhaps in the beginning, and perhaps because you're making an effort, but if you don't precisely, the goal is to do it really...
Like transparent.
Like a feather, I said.
Yeah. So the goal is for it to be smooth and transparent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other thing, I thought about what you said the other day. It was regarding, anyway, and I realized that it's true that I had been, like, when you talk about the world as my body, and this experience of non-separation being our default state, that I had been construing it as some phenomenal experience, to be reached or to attain. And I think what you're saying, because you were talking about happiness.
What I'm saying is that it is already the case before we superimpose all kinds of stuff onto it.
So, because you were talking about happiness, and like when I look back on even these past couple of years, it's very obvious that I'm more happy now than I was then. And it wasn't like I was chasing after happiness, as an object to have. I simply just looked at I just did what you said, basically, looking at the beliefs that got in the way of that happiness. So the belief of being a separate entity. And then as that belief eroded, I noticed that I was happier. So I think what you're saying is similarly, it's not about going after some experience or state of non-separation. It's simply by looking at the feelings and seeing that they're not true.
Right.
Simply seeing that they don't tell me anything about...
That we believe that they are telling us some things they aren't.
Yeah, because they don't, in fact, tell us anything about what we are. So by simply looking at those feelings, this natural state, we cannot not discover that, like you said, that there has never been an experience of non-separation.
Of separation.
Of separation, sorry, yeah. Because that's our natural state. And it's not like I need to go hunting for these feelings. It's just whatever comes to the surface, like if or when they arise, I just need to look at them and see that it's not true. So it's much simpler than what I had been making it out to be.
Yeah. But sometimes we give exercise to the doers because they would do something anyway. So it's better for them to do something which is not dangerous for other people and themselves. So it's like the way you give a plastic bone to the dog so that it doesn't chew at the furniture.
Yeah, that's funny because I was thinking precisely that because when I realized this, like that, oh yeah, I just have to see what I am not. I felt this huge weight lift off of me, like that I realized there had been all this seeking energy that I didn't even realize was there. Not even just seeking for the truth, but even before that, seeking.
Yes.
Yeah, for a way out of unhappiness, but more externally, in the external world, and then this U-turn that you always talk about.
Yeah, it's like that. This seeking energy that was there, not oriented, then gets oriented to the ultimate object, which is the truth, but still an object, and then collapses. And then oof.
Yeah, because it was really only after I came here that the seeking energy was brought into focus, because you give us the question basically to focus on. And so I could chew on just that one thing till it... So then, so I understand now when they say like, you cannot seek that which you already are, you can only see what you are not, So then all that seeking energy can be used for a celebration.
It becomes available and it finds its own ways.
So that's because I was remembering, you often say stick to your happiness and like live life from
That's the energy finding its own ways.
Yeah. And then also, I heard you once say to somebody, like, whatever more there is will come on a need-to-know basis.
Yes.
So.
Yes, that's because there is this desire in the mind to figure things out. And at some point, the mind has to realize that it cannot. That's the bad news. The mind cannot figure out the ultimate. There is no possible model on the level of the mind. The bad news. The good news is that the ultimate will supply the mind with whatever is needed at every moment, which is much, much nicer and simpler.
Okay, thank you.
Francis, when you read a book, say it's an entertaining book, a mystery, and it's entertaining, you can't wait to get through it. But aside from the butler doing it,
aside from
the plot of the book, like the butler did it, if it's more of a contemplative reading, like a dead sage, take your pick. Is there a recommended, it seems a different kind of reading. Any advice in that regard? I mean, sometimes it's a sentence or two seems sufficient. And the book can be put down for a while compared to, reading the mystery and, making progress and getting the storyline. It seems you can read the same thing 100 times And unlike the mystery story, something else is, you get something else out of it, the same words. A contemplative, spiritual reading, for lack of a better word.
I don't know, you want me to comment on literature? To me, essays, they are like users' manuals. Essays, it's like some Francis books, they are like happiness user's manual, the title. In other words, they are very practical. They have a very practical purpose, essays. So, in most essays, the purpose is to show how smart the author is. So when you understand that, it eliminates reading 99% or 99.99% of essays, right? And fiction, it's modern fiction is mostly going in the head of people who are in deep trouble. So basically what I would say, if you are not in enough trouble yourself, go for it. Or, of course, I guess the reason why people who are in trouble go for it, because it shows them that in the books there are people who are in more trouble than they are, so that in comparison, it makes them feel good. You see? So, of course, that can be described, all these people in deep trouble, in deep shit, in a very artfully manner, using either the language of 17th century or modern language, which is a little more stringent but artfully, right? But that doesn't make art. So what is left? What is left is a very small amount of literature that is inspired, that is about the truth. And not blatantly, not openly, but that is inspired. And then it is not really about the story. It is really how the story is told. Of course, there are another type of books who is interesting is because often the writer of a book, the novelist, in fact, puts himself in the book, his own experience, his own. And if there is a form of spiritual interest, then that shows in the book. If you read Proust, for instance, there is an interest in beauty, there is an interest in many things. So you may catch it, understand it, this interest, and enjoy it. But I think that most of literature, unfortunately, is trash. Just as most paintings in our museums are trash. And I'm not talking solely about modern art museums, where, of course, the trash proportion is extremely high. But even classical museum, I mean, who cares, you know, you're in the Louvre, and you have all these portraits of big shots, you know, of these guys, this nobility, you know, and they are in these fancy clothes, you know, full of gold, and they show how important they are. I mean, when you have seen one of them, you have seen all of them, you know. And okay, as Freddie said, you know, Freddie in Dirty Rotten Scoundrel, he said, yeah, I see that's a sculpture of a naked woman, and I can appreciate that. So, so yes, that's a very expensive garment, right? And I can appreciate that, but so a lot of it is trash, because then what remains? Then okay, then the technique of the painter, right? Usually the painter, he had many people working for him, kind of slave, you know, preparing the colors, the pigments, and so on. And also then was able to render with great details, you know, all the ornaments of the... But nowadays we are better. We just take a picture with this, you know, and it's a much better rendering of the stuff, you know. So what leaves us with a very small amount of artists who were not painting the dress, who were not... or the costume, who were not painting how big shots the guy was, but who were trying to paint the soul. And that's a very different. So among those, Rembrandt, Dürer, Holbein, for instance. When what I mentioned, you see there is, I think it's a Holbein painting where I think it's called The Architect, I'm not sure. There's some kind, and basically it's a portrait of a scientist or an architect. He has, I think, a compass, you know, and so. And he is thinking about, he's meditating. So you see the innocence, you see the simplicity of someone who is open, because when he's thinking about whatever solution he's trying to find, he's open. So the artist catches him in his innocence, in this openness. But usually it's not that. Usually it's, yeah, so we have enough of that. And just as usually the Romans, especially the modern ones, are about misery, more misery, more misery. I mean, who wants, I understand people say Kafka is great. I mean, have you read Kafka? I've tried, you know, I've tried to read the process, the trial, and I've tried to read also the chateau, the castle, or whatever it's called. And gee, it was like a nightmare. Because it has this repetitive quality in a nightmare, you know, like you find you're lost somewhere in a city, and you try to go back home, and there are no taxis, and then it keeps reoccurring, and I mean it's the same thing I've got. So I understand people who don't have enough of those, but they would read Kafka, and then by saying that I'm so politically incorrect. You see what I mean? I am. People will say, yes, he was so great, you know. I don't know, perhaps he revolutionized the German language or whatever. I don't know, but I'm just calling it the way I feel it, you know. I'm not stupid. I've learned all kinds of language. I've learned Latin, Greek, you know. So I'm like an academic. I don't see what they found in it, you know, other than, you know, because if you are too simple in your taste, you know, you say, I love Beethoven and Chopin, you know, And they say, yeah, you love better Chopin, but have you listened to Stockhausen? You see, because Chopin, yes, Chopin is easy. You know, it's for everybody, Chopin. It's not for the elite. You know, we are the elite. We are so the modern and everything that goes around these modern art galleries and the financial aspect of it, right? Of course, that you promote the guy to make money and also see the eternal story of the emperor's clothes, you know, that everybody is saying the emperor was naked, and the guy was pretending to put this beautiful dress, and everybody was saying, "Oh, how beautiful!" and the emperor was very happy, you know? And up until the village idiot or the jester said, "But the emperor is naked, right?" So I am the jester or the idiot of the village saying, you know, the emperor is naked. In most cases. I'm not denying value to everything, but I'm just calling the shots the way I see them. Anyway.
Very quickly, speaking of art, what you said, it seems like in Europe, most of the art, especially families and stuff, nobody is smiling. It's like they're depressed.
Yeah, and it's been like that for a long time. And there is this thing called angst, you know, the angst, which means fear, right, in German. So you need to convey the thing, and people say it's beautiful, like this painting, The Scream. Have you seen it? It's again a nightmare. I mean, painting nightmares. So if you want to be successful as an artist, you know, don't try to be a Rembrandt or even a Cézanne. You won't be. It's so sad. But that's the way it is, you know. People enjoy it, and they go to an art gallery and they have this Dom Pérignon champagne, right? They are very well dressed, you know, in black, because that's what's in fashion, right? And they see this stupid thing on the wall, and they speak to each other how it is post-modern, you know, like beyond and under, right? Post-modern. And they say, yes, but it's not even post-modern. I would say that it is post-modern. And they are among people of the same persuasion and of the same financial means, and that's the elite, that's okay. Cody. In A Course in Miracles, they speak about forgiving each time you have corrected an ignorant thought. Is that helpful? Is that consciousness forgiving itself? Or is it the body-mind that needs forgiveness? A body-mind cannot think. All thoughts come from consciousness, yes. So let's take it from there. All thoughts come from consciousness. So the ignorant thought, and perhaps the deed that it triggered, came from consciousness. Universal consciousness came from God. Therefore, there is nobody to be guilty of it. Since God did it, it's God who was having the ignorant thought. So you are already forgiven. You don't even need to forgive yourself. You see, that's the beauty of it. So rightfully so, they say you should forgive yourself after an ignorant thought. Because there is a good reason for that. Is that as a separate entity, you didn't have it. It was universal consciousness that had it. Therefore, if you judge yourself for having had it, that's a new ignorant thought. You see, that's a problem. If you judge yourself, it means you consider yourself to be a separate entity. And then you pile up a new ignorant thought on top of a previous one. And then if you judge yourself for having had this ignorant thought on top of the previous one, you add another one. So it's like post. Carl. The title is The Look. In this relatively new experience of seeing all objects as consciousness, but most recently of seeing all the people, especially the challenging ones in my life, as expressions of consciousness, I'm finding that this is shifting my experience altogether. There is the increasingly deep sense of perfection. Sometimes a random person's eyes will meet with my own, maybe as I drive in town or at a grocery, and out of the blue, inside an instantaneous glance, there is a complete identification to the beloved one behind those random eyes. The reference inside the gaze is her and brings me straight away to her. My eyes are awash to even write this for you. Of course, I feel to be sensible and make no bother to do anything, but only be in these shiny moments of celebration. There is no external or visible evidence that anything has happened at all, but I know differently. My question is, can you relate to this kind of experience? Yes. Is it normal? Yes, it's normal. And also, is it an example of non-phenomenal change that marks the quality of life inside consciousness? Yes, but you see, he's exchanging a smile, for instance, spontaneously. It's just a gift that you can give when you're happy, to people, to strangers. You don't know what a smile can do in someone's life, You don't know. Perhaps they were about to commit suicide, and it changes their life. So yes, and don't feel that when I mention the exchange of a smile, that I'm not understanding what you're saying, is that that I'm making it too little. What we have to understand is that even the simplest smile in this moment, it's a moment of love, it's a transcendental moment. And it has to be natural. At some point, it's always natural. You will surprise yourself having your body, touching people in a certain way, smiling in a certain way. It is simply that the body rediscovers rediscovers its natural condition. You will see that you always try to see how the other person sees and feels. You see that even if you have, for good reason, hurt someone in their beliefs, for instance, you feel compassion. You want at the same time to be their friend and to tell them, I love you, and it's not, don't worry about that. Tom, someone came to Iowa who has taken approximately 25 of your retreats. And like meditation, does a person get some benefit each time until one day they have crossed some sort of finish line? Or does this all keep going endlessly? Or, as you say, until a person is 99.9% free of misery, which seems quite nice. So the question is, yeah, it is not like we have a glimpse of truth and instantaneously we are cooked. The glimpse of truth is more like we are already in the oven, and the glimpse of truth is turning on, switching on the oven. Then the baking process takes some time. But as the cake gets baked, at some point, it starts smelling quite nice. Of course, I keep reading, of course, then there is a question of other birth. But perhaps if one is 99.9% awakens, being consciousness, more than identifying with the mind and the body, that this would last through any number of lifetimes being born. Once you how can I say that? The first thing is, don't worry about being reborn, because unless you want being reborn, you won't be. So why worry about something that is your choice? You see, it's like you go to the restaurant, and you know the menu because you often go to this restaurant. And you wonder, am I going to have pizza or pasta? I am worried. In fact, it's your choice, and you like the restaurant in addition to that. So why be worried about? It's not like pizza or pasta is imposed upon you. You'll have the choice. But if you want to get reborn, you'll be reborn, and you'll be reborn in the conditions that you want. So, nothing to worry about. Any questions here? Or I have to go down through Tom's series of questions? There we go. After a lot of questions, one of the biggest is, does there ever really come a time where one gets established in peace and happiness permanently? There is this Swami in Yuba City who reiterates that change is the only permanent thing, but the swings from satori's or stillness to utter despair and hopelessness seems a bit out of balance as change, or something permanent, not to mention if one keeps taking on human birth. So it's a little bit the same question. So as I said, don't worry about taking on human birth. How can I explain that? It's like a king who dreams that he is a poor panhandler. His permanent condition is to be a king. He has never been a panhandler. And no matter what he dreams doesn't change his condition. So, at some point, he wakes up from his nightmare more and more often and stays awake as a king longer and longer. When he goes back to the nightmare, at some point he understands that it is because he chooses to do so. So that's where the metaphor doesn't correspond to our experience, because the sleep comes to us. We don't choose really to go to it. But he chooses in this case. This king doesn't have to sleep. But he chooses to sleep because he enjoys being frightened in the nightmare. It's like children, some children, they love for you to tell them frightening stories, a little frightening story. So then, as you tell the story, as it gets frightening, then it comes closer to you. So they touch you, and at some point you need to take them. So why do they like frightening stories? It's like the king who likes the nightmares. No more questions here? Well, enjoy life.